important to paranormal study in the Milwaukee area or in the greater Milwaukee area. Some have had more impact in Wisconsin in general, but still we feel their influence even today. And then at the end, we'll talk about my latest YouTube video. I learned a little bit of video editing, so I'm going to subject you to that today. All right, so let's talk about, well, not me, because I'm a total dork and I was just introduced, so I'm going to go past that. So the talk is called Bride of Milwaukee, Forteana. And if you've been coming to the Milwaukee Paranormal Conference for, geez, how many years is it now, T? Like, is it 5 years? For the last 5 years, you've seen me speak on Milwaukee, Forteana. And Forteana is just a menagerie of every unusual paranormal phenomena. And it's named after Charles Fort, who was an early 20th century researcher who was able to spend his days in the New York Public Library. And he was able to do that because he inherited a small fortune. And he spent his days in the New York Public Library because he was combing through periodicals. Jeffrey just made me laugh. It's his fault. Yes, the Who Forted blog, run by Greg Newkirk, was one of my favorites back in the day. It's still funny. So Charles Fort collected all these stories about UFOs and ghosts and weird talents like telekinesis. And he compiled them into 4 books. So that's what I mean when I talk about Milwaukee, Forteana that happened here in the city or nearby. And you'll also find my favorite magazine in the UK, Fortean Times, which I know T. Krulos writes for, and I will too soon as well. So they call Charles Fort the father of the paranormal. And when I heard that term, I began wondering, well, if we have a father, we must have a mother. So I'll talk about the mother of the paranormal at the end of our presentation today. But he's called the father of the paranormal. And his work inspired research into the Bermuda Triangle, and he coined the now popular term teleportation. All right, so let's talk about some Milwaukee, Forteana. We had 2 very prominent poltergeist cases here. And poltergeist cases usually involve young people, children, and not always, but very often they're female. And that was the case in Milwaukee. So the first one that I'll talk about today was Mary Spiegel. So Mary Spiegel was a young Polish laborer, and she worked in the area that is now Bayview in a boarding house called the Giddings Boarding House. And then one day in August in 1874 rather, stuff just started flying all around the kitchen. There were freshly baked pies for the people who were boarding at the residence, many of whom worked at a nearby tannery. And these people who lived there, along with the owner, Mrs. Giddings, saw these things flying about, and they also saw dramatic things like pies exploding, freshly baked pies all over the kitchen that would just explode before their eyes. So it wasn't long before these phenomena became known in town, and other people witnessed them too. Like even the prominent tannery owner came to investigate what was going on because his workers were living there. And also a Milwaukee Sentinel reporter investigated. So these were people who weren't known to tell extraordinary stories, witnessing these extraordinary events. So Mary Spiegel eventually was fired because Mrs. Giddings noticed that when she wasn't there, everything was normal. And then when she would begin work, things would start flying around. Even if she was watched, things were flying around. So she wasn't throwing these things around. But when she was there, the phenomenon manifested. So she was fired. As a result, her poor family, who was relying on that income, um, really became angered with her, and her father beat her severely, at which point she jumped into the Milwaukee River in a suicide attempt. Now, a passerby was able to jump in and rescue her, and then at that point she was remanded to a doctor who lived in the city, and he took her case under his control, and she became better. But her parents reclaimed her, and then she kind of falls off the map. So we don't know what actually eventually happened to Mary Spiegel. And that's the frustrating thing about my research. It usually leads to dead ends where people who made news suddenly disappear into obscurity. So there's another case called the Swearing Ghost in 1923. And this involved a little girl named Clara Gottfried, and she lived on 159 Sherman Street. And what happened there is the family first noticed that, yes, telekinetic things were happening in the house. Items were flying around in the kitchen, in the bedroom. Pillows were flying around. Sounds like a pillow fight to me. But what also began to happen is these little notes would float down from the ceiling, seemingly out of nowhere. And on these notes were scrawled vile messages. So the family actually called police. And as a result of the police staying there, they identified that Clara Gottfried, although she wasn't caught manifesting any of these things personally, they came to the idea that maybe she was to blame. So they removed her to a children's home. And then, although first reports suggest that the activity ceased, as you would expect in a poltergeist case, there are other accounts that came up later that suggest that the activity continued on. So that's the swearing ghost. Now, we also had our very own legit psychic, Mary Hayes Chenoweth. She lived in Wisconsin and came to prominence in Whitewater. And then later in 1881, she said to her family, her adult sons, that they needed to move to the border and to what is Ashland today. So they needed to move up to Ashland and start an iron mine. Now, this was before the big iron rush in Wisconsin. This was 1881, and the first load of ore wouldn't actually be shipped until 1884. So this was 3 years beforehand. Mary Hayes said that she was receiving messages from what she called the power. So although she traveled in spiritualist circles, she knew spiritualists personally and was involved in seances and sittings, but she didn't conduct any of those herself. She had been a school teacher, and one day she was just walking across her kitchen floor, and she was struck down by some force from beyond, which she believed to be the hand of God, and she, from that day on, called the power. And this power would direct her to do certain things and grant her healing abilities. So what she actually did from that point on in her life is accepted people pro bono into her house to heal them with her psychic powers. Now, she never accepted any money for that, but the spirit would reimburse her in other ways, as in 1881, when whatever this power was advised her and her sons to relocate. And they actually acquired an iron mine, which another prospector had been working on for months beforehand, and in all the drilling was not able to find any veins of iron. So Mary said, I will tell you exactly where to drill. She did so and discovered one of the richest iron deposits in history. And actually, they hit ore in 1881, and that mine called the Ashland Mine would be giving ore until 1926, and they actually found this rich vein of iron ore in an area that was just 10 feet away from where the other drillers had been drilling. So I bet they were kicking themselves. So she did that with the Ashland mine and also the Harmony germanium mine, which had similar success. And she actually helped found the town of Hurley, Wisconsin, because all the miners who were coming in needed a place to live. All the miners that were working for them at the two mines started this town of Hurley, Wisconsin. And she actually, in response to seeing the poor education of the miners, started her own school to teach them how to read. And remember, she started out life as a school teacher. And so she taught them how to read. And then there were 6 miners in particular that showed continued interest. So she ended up putting them through college. And it was okay because money was not a problem. And so then they sold the mine, and they had initially invested $16,000 in 1881, 1882. And when they sold the mine, right before their move in 1887, it was worth $4 million. That's in 1887 dollars. So you can imagine how much of a fortune that was. So they were able to move to California, and they started another little town. Their estate was called Edenvale, and it had its own post office and power station. It was self-sufficient. And from her advisement, her sons would go on to great success. One of her sons would become the U.S. Congress person for California. The two sons also started the San Jose Mercury News and began the Farmers Collective, which later became the Sun's Sweet Growers. So if you had your prunes today, you know all about Sunsweet. So today you can still visit Edenvale. It's now a conference center. Now, one way that this connects to Milwaukee is in her time in Whitewater, she would meet Morris Pratt, and he told her that, oh man, if the spirits ever decided to give me a fortune, I would use it to give back to the spiritualist faith. And she said, really? And he said, yes, I promise that if I earn a fortune through the advice of the spirits, I will give back. So he actually made a huge profit as well in mining investments. And he started the first psychic school in 1901 called the Morris Pratt Institute in Whitewater, Wisconsin. this beautiful building is no longer there, unfortunately, but the Morris Pratt Institute is still around, and you can visit it in Milwaukee, and it's open daily, and they have some incredible books in their spiritualist library. So I'd really recommend it. It's absolutely free. Now, let's talk about the paranormal radical, Dr. Juliet Severance. So Juliet Severance was, like many burgeoning spiritualists at the time, when she was young, she was very interested in racial equality, in votes for women. And so she also, as she grew, she became ill. So she decided that she needed to learn about medicine. And so she apprenticed herself with a doctor and then later went to medical school. She was one of the first women in the United States to do so, and actually graduated as a medical doctor in 1858. And it took her three years of college beyond that apprenticeship. And she was only 25 when she actually received her MD. Now, she spent some time in Whitewater, but then she also afterward moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Mike's asking, what about Dr. Quinn, medicine woman? Well, I think Dr. Juliet Severance is a contemporary. And more interestingly than that, she was also very, very involved in the paranormal. Of course, she spoke about rights for women. She advocated for the end of corsets and formal dress for women. She wanted women to be able to wear pants. Anyway, she also advocated for vegetarianism and had a lot of forward-thinking ideas. She also wrote many books and was a sought-after speaker. And Victoria Woodhull, a person better known in the women's movement, actually called her the radical of radicals. She also believed in free love, but although she thought that in most cases the institution of marriage was not good for women and more of an imprisonment, she did marry and have 3 children, and her husband, as it turns out, was also a spiritualist and a psychometrist. So people would bring items to him like a lock of hair, and then he could help them with their spiritual development, and then she could help them with their medical needs. She actually provided free medical care to all working women in the Milwaukee area. And interestingly, I was reading her book, which she wrote many, but the particular book I was reading, which you can get for free, is called Evolution of Life in Earth and Spirit Conditions. And in that, she reveals that she was actually an exorcist. She talks about how there are people who had been referred to her as being incurably insane. And these people would be brought to her office, and she would be able to find a way to dispossess them of the spirits, which sounds a lot like exorcism to me. So she wasn't only resorting to psychic healing and vegetarianism when standard medicine didn't work. She was also resorting to exorcism. So I also want to talk about the Witch of Wall Street just briefly. Her name was Grace Cortland, and the book was called that Juliet Severance wrote was called Evolution of Life in Earth and Spirit Conditions. So just look up Juliet Severance on Wikimedia Commons, and you'll find it. So Grace Cortland was also a Milwaukee psychic who gained such prominence here with her predictions for Milwaukee and then later Chicago investors that she moved to New York City and became known as the Witch of Wall Street. But she would come back here where her family, her adult children lived. And she had one daughter named Maisie. And at one point, her daughter was disgraced by a young gentleman who promised marriage and then got the goods and recanted. And so she confronted him in downtown Milwaukee, brandishing a bullwhip. And anyway, he was sorry that he had ever brought Maisie to shame because she wasn't shy about using it. So that's why I love Grace Cortland. Now, I promised at the beginning that we talk about the mother of the paranormal, and I believe that's the original ghost hunter, Catherine Crowe. Now, she was from England, and she was born way before Charles Fort in the 1800s. And since today is World Mental Health Day, I prepared a new video for my new YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormal women. And we're going to watch that in just a moment. So Catherine Crowe wrote possibly the most influential book and certainly the most internationally popular book on the paranormal back in 1848. And you can get this for free on Project Gutenberg, but through many other sites as well. And it's called The Night Side of Nature. I would really recommend it. It's 400 pages of paranormal gold. But before that, the reason that she decided to write it was in the 1840s. She was a mystery writer at first, but the reason she decided to turn her attention to the paranormal was because she was reading widely in other languages, not just English. She was from Kent, England, but she learned German and she learned French. And in particular, the German researchers at the time, doctors and scientists, were discovering some amazing things. And she thought she had to write about them. So one of the things she did first in 1845 was she translated a book about an extraordinary psychic called The Seeress of Prevorst, which was written by famous Dr. Justinus Kerner. And then she just decided, well, I have to write my own book. And she's the reason why you know the word poltergeist and the word doppelganger, because she was reading about German discoveries in that area and brought those terms and concepts to the English-speaking audience. All right, so we're going to watch this video. And remember, you can subscribe to youtube.com/paranormalwomen. And I think you'll enjoy this video. I have more videos up there currently as well, and many more in the works. So here we go.
It's Allison from American Ghost Walks. If you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button below
and the little bell icon, and then you'll never miss a new video.
Today we'll talk about a scandal that has haunted author Catherine Crowe for over 150 years. You may remember Catherine Crowe as the investigator who conducted the first paranormal investigation. She is also the author of arguably the most popular book on the paranormal in history, The Night Side of Nature. Although Catherine Crowe's work has been largely forgotten today, she's the reason that you know the word poltergeist. Although she made significant contributions to paranormal study, you may not know about Catherine Crowe today because of a scandal that still overshadows her legacy. It involves an incident in 1854 that is at best exaggerated and at worst largely fabricated by mean-spirited masters of 19th century snark. Rumors began to circulate in early March of 1854, alleging that Catherine Crowe had been found wandering the streets of Edinburgh near her residence. She was out of her mind, and most shocking of all, naked. As the story goes, she was locked away in a madhouse. Several versions have surfaced over the years ascribing various kooky details to explain her nudity, such as the idea that spirits had duped her into believing she was invisible. Let's separate fact from fiction. Catherine Crowe most likely did not look like this. She was 64, so she may have looked more like this. This is what we know for sure. Evidence suggests that it was none other than Charles Dickens who first spread these rumors, at least in writing. In a letter to the Reverend James White, dated March 7th, 1854, he has this to say.
Mrs. Crowe has gone stark mad and stark naked on the spirit rapping imposition. She was found t'other day in the street clothed only in her chastity.
On March 9th, Dickens wrote another letter to his friend Émile de la Rue, stating,
There is a certain Mrs. Crowe, usually resident in Edinburgh. She was a medium and an ass, and I don't know what else. The other day she was discovered walking down her own street in Edinburgh, not only stark mad but stark naked too.
In April, when the story hit the press, it was no surprise that it first appeared in The Zoist, a publication edited by Dr. John Elliotson, a friend of Charles Dickens.
A well-known authoress has gone stark mad and stark naked on the spirit rapping. She was found the other day in the open street, as her mother bore her. She is now in a madhouse.
Total Dickens move.
Many writers have repeated this questionable account for more than 150 years. These writers retold the story largely verbatim, without question, or asked the wrong questions. The question is not, was Catherine Crowe naked in public? Who cares? The question is, why did Charles Dickens and John Elliotson resort to such a scornful ad hominem attack? Well, for that you need to know that Dr. John Elliotson was a prominent mesmerist. Mesmerism, or animal magnetism as it was once called, was a controversial practice. Today we call it hypnosis, a modernized variant of mesmerism. Charles Dickens, as it turns out, was a big fan of mesmerism and even experimented with it on his friends. In 1854, the popularity of mesmerism was challenged by the newer spiritualist fad. As a result of this perceived threat, the Zoist, a mesmerist publication, did its best to portray spiritualists as misguided dupes who were often driven mad by their obsession. When talk about Catherine Crowe's mad exposure, as her friend Robert Chambers described it, came to Dickens and Elliotson's attention, it was too good to pass up. Even though Crowe wrote in glowing terms about mesmerism in The Night Side of Nature, later she had also shown an interest in spiritualism. A scandal about the foremost paranormal author succumbing to the evils of spiritualism is perhaps just what beleaguered mesmerists thought they needed to win back the spotlight. It was too late, of course, because the concept that the spirits of the dead are all around us had captivated the public, and at that time there was no way to defeat the burgeoning popularity of spiritualism. When she saw the allegations in the Zoist, a friend of Catherine Crowe's, activist Sophia de Morgan, tried her best to set the record straight by writing Dr. Elliotson in a letter to the editor. She explained that Catherine Crowe
did not perceive the feverish attack coming on, and in consequence was seriously delirious for 2 days. The attack was removed by a very simple dose of medicine, but in the meantime, some of her friends, believing her to be permanently insane, had her brought up by a night train to Hanwell. Dr. Connolly soon saw that she was not a fit inmate for this place, and assisted her in extricating herself.
This unfortunately only resulted in additional snark from Elliotson in future issues of the Zoist. But Dr. Connolly, who treated Crowe, confirmed De Morgan's comments in a letter to George Combe, a mutual friend. Dr. Connolly wrote of Catherine Crowe on April 2nd, 1854, summing up the case with this simple sentence.
When she came here, her delusions had passed away like a dream.
Dr. John Conley was the superintendent of the famous Hanwell Asylum and the leading mental health expert in England at the time. My search of Hanwell Asylum records revealed that although an admissions list for that time period does exist, Catherine Crow's name is not on it. She was never actually admitted to Hanwell. But what would modern medicine have to say about Catherine Crow's case? Instead of relying on my own judgment, I consulted an expert. Brendan Masulo is an author and parapsychologist. He's also a licensed therapist. This is what he had to say about the case.
The paranormal world know me as a parapsychologist, but actually my training, I did study at the University of Edinburgh for parapsychology. And I've worked in the mental health field for approximately about 20 years, maybe 19 years. I've had all kinds of positions in the mental health field, most notably in the emergency rooms for one of the leading hospitals here in Ohio. And in the emergency room, one of my roles was to do crisis evaluations on patients. In the case of Catherine Crow, to my knowledge, in talking with you briefly, she didn't really have any history of psychiatric issues. And I think we all believe that we'll never have sort of psychotic symptoms. But the case is delirium can happen to all of us, from a medication to sleep deprivation, to infections, to illnesses. It could happen to us, pneumonia. These are all things. Changes in medications, drugs, things like that can cause delirium. There is a difference between delirium and mental health issues. I mean, delirium is basically impairment, cognitive disturbances, hallucinations, disorganized thoughts, change in personality, aggressiveness. But these things are often brought on by a medical condition. And that's what delirium is. And delirium can happen to anyone. I've seen patients in the emergency rooms who took very common medications who would present with auditory, visual hallucinations, even tactile hallucinations. The woman had felt like there were bugs crawling all over her, and she had some paranoid delusions as well. And this was all from a very common medication she was prescribed. Other cases, we would often see patients in the emergency room with a common, especially the elderly, with urinary tract infections or UTIs. These would cause sometimes delirious type symptoms, confusion, disorganization, agitations, hallucinations. And, the causes of delirium, I wasn't a medical guy, I'm not diagnosing it, but from my experience working with ER physicians and psychiatrists, oftentimes they would have to rule out if someone presents with hallucinations or delusions or manic behavior, disorganized thoughts, all these types of things. One of the things the ER does is really parcel out what's going on. And it doesn't always have to be mental health or schizophrenia. Delirium is another possible reason. From everything that I've read and seen, it doesn't seem like insanity. It seems like she had delirium. I don't understand why anyone would not believe that when she says it. If she doesn't have any previous history of it and no history afterwards, it seems likely that it was an isolated incident of delirium. And it was treated. Once she was better medically, she didn't have any of these episodes again.
I have been for some time suffering from chronic gastric inflammation. I was taken ill on the 26th of February, and was certainly for 5 or 6 days, not more, in a state of unconsciousness. During this aberration, I talked of the spirit trapping, and fancied spirits were directing me because I was writing on the subject. But I was not, and am not, mad about spirits or anything else.
I think it's fair to say that whatever happened in 1854, we can put it to rest. All reliable accounts show that it was a short-lived episode, most likely due to physical illness. Catherine Crow would live for another 22 years without incident. She continued to write thoughtful articles and books, including Ghost and Family Legends and Spiritualism and the Age We Live In, both published in 1859. During the making of this video, I realized that descriptors such as mad, crazy, insane are not medical diagnoses. These adjectives are put-downs. Today we realize that whether or not a person is mentally ill does not determine their value. We value individuals based on their contributions to society and the quality of their work. Let's value Catherine Crowe by reading and appreciating her groundbreaking work, which laid the foundations for parapsychology and paranormal study as we know it today.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.
All right. Great job, Allison. If you want to come on and say goodbye to everybody real quick, we are about to jump into the next session with Chitin Noir. We're talking about lizard people. So moving from the awesome Catherine Crowe and my awesome sister to lizard people, obviously it's a natural connection. But it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm so glad we learned so much about Catherine Crowe. Also learned Charles Dickens, right? He puts the dick in Dickens. And we are excited to learn more at Paranormal Women. YouTube.com/Paranormal Women. Please subscribe to that channel. I'm subscribed. I think it's awesome. And I'm also a fan of the next presenter. And we're going to jump over right now. And I'll see you guys in about 8 minutes. And then Chitin's going to come on and talk about lizard people and the history and legends. And where did that come from? Let's go find out.